She never imagined her life would end the moment she said, "I do." The wedding was everything people dreamed of: luxury, elegance, power. The venue shimmered with golden lights and the guests whispered in awe. But behind the white dress and flawless makeup, fear wrapped tightly around her heart. This was not a marriage built on love. It was a deal. She was marrying the most dangerous man in the city, the Mafia king. A man whose name alone could silence a room. A man who ruled the underground world with absolute authority. This marriage was meant to secure peace between powerful forces, and she was the price. From the very first second she stood beside him, she felt the distance. His expression was calm, unreadable, almost cold. He didn't smile. He didn't touch her hand longer than necessary. To him, this ceremony was business, nothing more. But for her, it felt like a sentence. That night, as the mansion doors closed behind her, reality finally settled in. She was no longer free. Guards stood outside her room. Cameras watched every corridor. The mansion felt less like a home and more like a fortress. She expected cruelty. She expected anger. She expected fear. But what she didn't expect was silence. He kept his distance. He gave her space. He never forced himself on her. Instead, he treated her like something fragile, something valuable, but untouchable. This confused her more than violence ever could. Who was this man really? Behind the tailored suits and cold authority, she sensed pain. Sleepless nights, a past soaked in blood and betrayal. He trusted no one. He lived surrounded by enemies, even inside his own walls. And slowly something unexpected began to happen. Fear turned into curiosity. Curiosity turned into questions. And questions turned into a dangerous realization. The Mafia king might be the loneliest man she had ever known. This marriage was meant to trap her, but she didn't yet realize it had already trapped him too. Living inside the Mafia king's mansion felt like learning to breathe in a place where the air itself was dangerous. Every morning she woke up to silence. Heavy, controlled, watchful silence. The halls were spotless, the rooms luxurious, but nothing felt warm. Guards stood at every corner, their eyes trained on movement, their hands never far from their weapons. She was protected, yes, but also constantly observed. She quickly understood the rules of this world. Nothing was said without meaning. Nothing was done without consequence. People lowered their voices when he entered a room. Meetings stopped the moment she appeared. Some looked at her with curiosity, others with resentment. To them, she was not just his wife, she was a potential weakness, and weaknesses did not survive long in this world. He remained distant, calm, always in control. When he spoke to her, his words were brief and careful, as if every sentence had been weighed before leaving his mouth. He never raised his voice, never showed anger. That made him far more terrifying than someone who did. But she noticed the cracks, the sleepless nights when he returned home just before dawn, the scars on his hands that told stories he never shared, the way he stood with his back to the wall, even in his own house. This was a man who trusted no one, not even himself. Slowly, fear stopped being the only thing she felt. She began to wonder how someone became like him. What kind of life turned a man into a king feared by so many? She realized that power had cost him everything: peace, safety, and the ability to love without suspicion. One evening, she dared to ask him a simple question. "Why me?" He paused. For a moment, the Mafia king looked tired. Not angry, but not cold. Just exhausted. "You were chosen because you were safe," he said, "and because this marriage would keep others alive." It wasn't an answer that comforted her, but it was honest. That night, she understood something important. She was not the enemy here. She was another piece trapped inside a game much bigger than both of them. And for the first time, she stopped seeing him only as a monster. She began to see the man behind the crown. A man who ruled the underworld, but had no escape from it. Everyone expected her to disappear quietly into his world, to obey, to lower her eyes, to become another shadow walking through the mansion halls. But she refused. Fear still lived inside her, but it no longer controlled her. She realized that staying silent would not protect her. It would erase her, and she had already lost too much to lose herself as well. So she began to speak. At first it was small things. Questions about rules that made no sense. Comments that challenged decisions she didn't understand, a refusal to accept orders given without explanation. The reactions were immediate. The people around her grew uncomfortable. Guards exchanged glances, advisors stiffened. No one had ever questioned the Mafia king in his own house, especially not his wife. But she did. Their confrontations were quiet, controlled, and intense. No shouting, no threats, just words carefully chosen, each one cutting deeper than a weapon. He would listen without interrupting, his face unreadable, his eyes dark and focused. He should have been angry. He should have punished her. Instead, he watched her. There was something in her defiance that unsettled him. She was not reckless. She was not foolish. She spoke with clarity, with dignity, with a strength that didn't rely on force. She didn't fear him the way others did, and that frightened him. For years, he had ruled through control and fear. It was the only language his world understood. But she brought something unfamiliar into his life. Honesty, resistance, a mirror he never wanted to face. Slowly, the way he treated her began to change. He listened longer. He explained more. He stopped seeing her as a burden and started seeing her as a person. She noticed it too. The walls between them didn't fall, but they shifted. Conversations lasted longer. Silences felt less threatening. For brief moments, they existed not as king and captive, but as two people trapped by the same fate. She realized something dangerous was happening. She was no longer just surviving in his world. She was changing it. And the Mafia king, who had never allowed anyone close enough to challenge him, was beginning to realize that the greatest threat to his control was not his enemies. It was the woman standing calmly in front of him, refusing to disappear. The danger came quietly. There were no warnings, no dramatic signs, just a subtle change in the air. Guards moving faster, voices dropping lower, tension tightening every corner of the mansion. She felt it before anyone told her. That night, she was alone in one of the side corridors when everything shattered. A sudden noise, footsteps rushing, a scream cut short. Panic exploded inside her chest as she realized this was not an accident. She was the target. Someone had decided to strike where he was weakest. Before fear could fully consume her, chaos erupted. Alarms rang. Shouts echoed through the halls. She froze, trapped between instinct and terror, unsure which way to run. And then he appeared. The Mafia king moved with lethal precision. His calm vanished, replaced by pure focus and controlled fury. He placed himself in front of her without hesitation, shielding her with his body as if it were the most natural thing in the world. In that moment, she saw him clearly, not as a king, not as a criminal, but as a man who refused to let her be harmed. Gunshots echoed. Orders were shouted. The threat was eliminated quickly, brutally. When the danger passed, silence returned, heavier than before. She was shaking. He noticed. Without a word, he guided her away from the chaos, his hand firm but gentle on her arm. For the first time, his touch wasn't distant or formal. It was protective. Later, alone in the quiet of the room, reality finally caught up to her. She had nearly died, not because of something she had done, but because of who she was married to. She expected anger from him, blame, distance. Instead, she saw something else. Fear, not fear for himself, but for her. He stood near the window, tense, silent, his jaw tight as if holding back emotions he refused to show. She realized then that this attack had shaken him deeply. "You should have stayed guarded," he said finally, his voice low, not angry, but strained. "And you shouldn't have had to save me," she replied. Their eyes met. Something changed in that silence. From that night on, the rules shifted. Security around her doubled. His presence became constant. He checked on her without being asked. He stayed closer than before. She understood the truth now. She was no longer just part of a deal. She had become his responsibility. And perhaps something more dangerous than that. She had become someone he couldn't afford to lose. After the attack, nothing felt the same. The mansion was quieter, but the silence between them was heavier than ever. He stayed closer now, not openly protective, not controlling, but present, always aware of where she was, always alert. She noticed the change in small ways. He asked if she had slept. He waited for her before meetings. He stood just close enough to block danger, but not close enough to touch. It confused her. She told herself it was only responsibility, only guilt, only duty. But deep down, she knew it was something else. Their conversations changed too. They spoke longer, less guarded. He asked questions, not about what she needed to do, but about who she was before this life. Her dreams, her fears, the things she missed. No one had asked her those questions in a long time. She found herself answering honestly. That honesty was dangerous, because somewhere between shared silence and quiet words, feelings began to grow, slowly, invisibly, like a fire starting beneath stone. She hated herself for it. Loving him was forbidden. Loving him was foolish. Loving him could destroy them both. He was the Mafia king, a man surrounded by violence, secrets, and blood. A man whose enemies would use love as a weapon without hesitation. And yet, when she looked at him now, she no longer saw only danger. She saw exhaustion, loneliness, a man carrying the weight of a world that allowed no weakness. He felt it too. He noticed the way her presence calmed him, the way her voice grounded him when everything else felt unstable. He began to linger longer than necessary just to listen. That realization terrified him. Love was a liability in his world, a mistake he couldn't afford. He had built his empire by eliminating weakness, and love was the greatest weakness of all. So he tried to distance himself, but distance only made the pull stronger. Late one night they stood in the same room, the tension between them unbearable. Words hovered unspoken. Truths waited just beneath the surface. Neither of them crossed the line, but both knew it was already too late. Because love does not begin with touch. It begins the moment you realize you care more than you should. And in that moment they both understood something terrifying. These feelings were no longer something they could control. They were something they would have to face. The peace they were beginning to feel did not last. In his world it never did. Trouble arrived in whispers first. Rumors passed between trusted men. Warnings spoken behind closed doors. Old enemies were moving again. Alliances that had once been solid were cracking. Someone was testing his borders, searching for a weakness. And she knew exactly what that weakness was. Her. The Mafia king tried to keep her away from the growing danger. He increased security, limited her movements, and surrounded her with guards. To him, this was protection. To her, it felt like another kind of cage. But this time, she didn't stay silent. She saw the strain in his eyes, the way tension tightened his shoulders, the way his patience wore thinner each day. He was fighting battles on multiple fronts, against enemies outside, and against the feelings he refused to acknowledge. One night, an ambush confirmed their fears. A convoy was attacked. Blood was spilled. A message was sent. The past he thought he had buried was demanding attention. When he returned to the mansion that night, injured but alive, she saw the cost of his world clearly for the first time. Not through stories or rumors, but through the blood on his shirt and the exhaustion in his face. She didn't ask questions. She helped him. Quietly, steadily, without fear. That moment changed everything. He realized something he had never allowed himself to admit. She was no longer just someone he was protecting. She was someone who stood beside him, not because she was forced to, but because she chose to. That choice mattered. As threats grew closer, she refused to hide. She learned how his world worked, when to stay silent, when to speak, when to trust her instincts. Her presence became a calm anchor in the middle of chaos, and he, in turn, began to trust her. Not with his power, not with his secrets, but with himself. For the first time in his life, the Mafia king was no longer facing danger alone, and that terrified him more than any enemy ever had. Because now, losing a fight didn't just mean losing control, it meant losing her. The world around them was closing in. Enemies were no longer hiding in the shadows. Threats became direct. Warnings turned into ultimatums. Every move the Mafia king made was being watched, calculated, and challenged. For the first time since he took control of his empire, he faced a decision that power alone could not solve. Her presence had changed the balance. She saw it clearly now. The way his advisors spoke carefully around her. The way his enemies used her name in threats. The way his men tightened security whenever she entered a room. She was no longer just his wife, she was leverage. One night he finally spoke the words he had been avoiding. "You should leave," he told her. The sentence was simple, but it carried the weight of everything unspoken between them. Leaving meant freedom, safety, a chance to return to a life untouched by violence. It was everything she had once dreamed of. But it also meant abandoning him, to face his enemies alone. She looked at him and saw the truth in his eyes. He wasn't pushing her away because he didn't care, he was pushing her away because he cared too much. That realization hurt more than fear ever had. She understood now. Loving him meant choosing a life filled with danger, uncertainty, and sacrifice. Staying meant accepting the darkness that followed him everywhere. But leaving meant something else entirely: regret. She told him she needed time, not to decide between love and freedom, but to understand what she was willing to live with. That night, neither of them slept. He stood at the edge of his empire, ready to give up everything to protect her. She stood at the edge of a choice that would define the rest of her life. In the morning, she would decide, not based on fear, not based on duty, but on truth, and whatever she chose next would change both of them forever. By the time morning came, the decision had already been made. The Mafia king knew it before she spoke. There was a tension in the air that no silence could hide. His enemies had stopped sending warnings. They were done negotiating. What followed next would not be subtle. It would be violent, final, and unforgiving. The war he had avoided for years had arrived. He prepared with the cold efficiency that made him feared. Orders were given. Loyal men were positioned. Safe houses were cleared. Every possible weakness was sealed. Except one. Her. No matter how carefully he planned, she remained the center of everything. His enemies knew it, his allies knew it, and most painfully of all, he knew it too. When the first attack came, it was brutal. Explosions shattered the night. Gunfire echoed through streets once controlled by his name alone. Betrayal revealed itself from places he trusted most. People he had protected turned against him when fear outweighed loyalty. This time, the fight wasn't about territory or power. It was about survival. She was hidden away, guarded by his most trusted men. But safety felt fragile. Every minute stretched like a lifetime. She waited, knowing that every sound outside could mean everything was about to end. Meanwhile, he fought like a man who had nothing left to lose. There was no hesitation in his movements, no mercy in his decisions. Each step forward was fueled by a single thought, ending this before it reached her. In the middle of the chaos, he was forced to face a truth he had never allowed himself to accept. If he survived, his world would never be the same. If he failed, she would pay the price. The battle reached its breaking point when he came face to face with the one enemy who had orchestrated it all, the man who believed love had made the Mafia king weak. They were wrong. Love had not weakened him. It had sharpened him. The confrontation was swift and final. When the smoke cleared, the war was over, but the cost was undeniable. Lives were lost, trust was destroyed, and the empire he once ruled without question stood forever changed. As dawn approached, he returned to her, alive, wounded, changed, and for the first time since their marriage began, he wasn't sure what awaited him next, fear or forgiveness. When he finally stood in front of her, silence spoke louder than words. He was alive, but not untouched. The war had left marks on his body, on his empire, and on his soul. For the first time, the Mafia king did not look invincible. He looked human. She saw everything in his eyes: regret, fear, and something deeper than power had ever been. He told her the truth, without excuses, without control. He explained the choices he had made, the lives he had taken, and the cost of ruling a world built on violence. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not demand loyalty. He simply asked her to understand, and she listened. She realized then that there was no perfect ending waiting for them, no clean escape from the past. Love had not erased the blood, the danger, or the consequences, but it had changed something more important. It had given them honesty. For the first time since their forced marriage began, she was given a real choice: to walk away and reclaim the life she lost, or to stay, knowing exactly who he was and what his world demanded. That choice terrified her, but she also understood something she had never admitted before. Running away would not erase what they had become together. And staying did not mean surrender, it meant choosing with open eyes. She chose to stay, not because she was trapped, not because she was afraid, but because love, when chosen freely, is stronger than fear. The Mafia king knew this choice changed everything. He stepped back from the shadows, dismantling parts of the empire that had consumed his life. He did not become innocent, but he became accountable. Their future was uncertain, dangerous, fragile, but it was real. In the end, there was no dramatic escape from the Mafia king's embrace. Because the truth was simple, the real escape was no longer needing one,